Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. FBI Director James Comey was back on Capitol Hill today, this time to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Democrats on that committee grilled him over his behavior in last fall's election. In response, the director acknowledged that his actions may have played some role in causing Donald Trump to win, and he said that possibility made him feel sick.
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. But honestly, it wouldn't change the decision. Everybody who disagrees with me has to come back to October 28th with me and stare at this and tell me what you would do. Would you speak or would you conceal? And I could be wrong, but we honestly made a decision between those two choices that even in hindsight, and this has been one of the world's most painful experiences, I would make the same decision. I would not conceal that.
Hillary Clinton can identify with that feeling of nausea. She seems to have decided she would have won easily last fall if it had not been for the meddling of James Comey. She said this yesterday.
If the election had been on October 27th, I'd be your president. But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
So did the FBI director scuttle the Hillary candidacy? And if so, what exactly does that mean for his capacity to run the Federal Bureau of Investigation? Congressman Tim Ryan is a Democrat representing Ohio, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Do you buy that? Do you think Hillary would have won if it hadn't been for Comey?
I think it's unclear. It clearly had some effect. But if you get into Wisconsin, Michigan,
right,
really, it shouldn't even been close in those states. We should be up, we should be winning those states by 9 or 10 points. I think it gets back to the fact that there really wasn't a strong economic message in the campaign. And
right,
at the end of the day, I think that made the difference more than anything else.
I agree with you there. But I also think it's plausible that when the FBI director came out and said, we're investigating one of the presidential candidates, and we're not going to be specific about what we're investigating, probably didn't help.
There's no question.
Then why don't Democrats call for his resignation?
Well, I think it's unclear what impact it had, and clearly he justified what he had to say there. Right. It had some effect. Obviously, I think you're investigating Donald Trump in July. Didn't talk about that at all, didn't mention that at all. I think that was unfair, and it clearly dealt a blow to her campaign. But again, I don't think it can be said that he cost him the campaign. And the real focus now moving forward is not the tweets from Donald Trump about the campaign, not the comments from Hillary Clinton, is that the current president is under investigation by the FBI for ties to Russia and Russia's influence in the campaign. I think that moving forward is what we all should be concerned about.
Well, of course, Democrats would like to keep it there, but you're making an argument that contradicts itself, I think. Most Democrats are. They're saying that here's a guy who has a lot of power and misused that power, and that misuse of power affected the outcome of the election. But we still trust him enough to investigate a guy we don't like because it serves our immediate political purposes. That seems to be the position.
Well, the thing about the FBI position, and there's a reason why it's a 10-year appointment, is
right,
that it's supposed to be insulated from politics.
Right.
And I don't think he intentionally tried to influence the election. I don't think that was his intent. Did he have some effect on it? Of course he did. Of course those poll numbers did sink. Another argument is whether or not it affected the election on the whole. But he's supposed to be insulated from these things, and we can have our opinions, but at the end of the day, you don't throw out somebody in the FBI because they do something you don't necessarily like.
Unless it totally violates precedent and principle and common sense, and it's compounded by a series of public statements that are baffling in their weirdness and overreach. Here's one. Today, he said, and I'm quoting, this is the FBI director, Russia is the greatest threat of any nation on earth to the United States and its democracy. Never mind China, North Korea, Iran, unsecured nukes in Pakistan. That is a deeply subjective statement. He's not a policymaker. Why is he saying things like that, speculating like that in public?
My interpretation of that when I heard it is that
yes,
he was talking about the democratic process.
Okay.
Putin's affecting these elections in the Ukraine, in those Eastern Bloc countries, in Estonia, and in the United States trying to affect the democratic process. That's how I read it. Clearly, okay, Russia is more of a threat. North Korea clearly is a threat. I thought he was referring to the democratic process.
So I was actually going to draw a little chart on my piece of paper here. So if we're to assess which world figures had a measurable outcome on the election, and you put Vladimir Putin in one column and James Comey in the other, I think Comey would win overwhelmingly. There actually is no extant evidence, if it's been made public, that Putin personally had any effect on this election. For all the talk, there's no evidence. But we know for a fact that Comey did. So it's a little weird, would you say, that Comey is trying to divert attention over, again, with presenting no evidence, to Putin?
No, we don't know about the Putin piece. Obviously, we know about the Comey piece. We know about the emails.
Well, exactly
that has been debated ad nauseum throughout the whole campaign. And Comey's statements, his testimonies, were all very public. Putin was not working publicly. Putin was working covertly, and it sure does seem like he had a hell of an effect, releasing all those documents from the DNC, all of Podesta's emails, clearly hacking one political party over the other. And Tucker, we all should be concerned about this. I'm not saying this as a Democrat. We should be concerned that Vladimir Putin, who has influenced elections in other places, they're trying to do things in the Arctic with natural gas. They're doing things in the Ukraine.
I'm not here to defend Putin.
No, I know you're not. I'm just saying that.
Well, I haven't seen any evidence that any of this is true. That's the point. And after watching Comey again and again over the span of more than a year make these statements in public that are very hard to understand, claims that he does not back up, isn't it fair for the rest of us to say, okay, where's your evidence?
Well, this started in July. The investigation is underway. You have numerous people in Donald Trump's orbit who have not only met with Russian officials, but most importantly, and I say this as a father, lied about those meetings that they had with Russian officials. To me, meeting with them, fine, whatever, you had meetings. Lying about them, now all of a sudden the red flags go up. So to say...
Okay, but so red flags are different from evidence. Look, I'm just saying...
The investigation's happening now. You want, but if this was turned around and you know, they were trying to accuse Hillary Clinton of this, and we were saying, well, wait a minute.
I did say that. When he came out and said we're investigating her, my view was, at the time and now, you can't say you're investigating someone without explaining what it is and what evidence you have, because that person can't defend himself against an amorphous charge. And Hillary suffered from it, Trump is suffering from it now, and it's all coming from one guy, Jim Comey, and it makes me nervous.
But nobody's been prosecuted. Nobody's been put to a grand jury. Not yet, anyway.
Well, we'll see. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, despite admitting he may have influenced the election, Director Comey still offered his strongest defense yet of his conduct last year. He said his actions were compelled by then-Attorney General Loretta Lynch and her private meeting with Bill Clinton.
The capper was, and I'm not picking on the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, who I like very much, but her meeting with President Clinton on that airplane was the capper for me. And I then said, you know what, the department cannot by itself credibly end this. The best chance we have as a justice system is if I do something I never imagined before, step away from them and tell the American people, look, here's what the FBI did, here's what we found, here's what we think. And that offered us the best chance of the American people believing in the system, that it was done in a credible way. That was a hard call for me to make, to call the Attorney General that morning and say, I'm about to do a press conference and I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to say.
Of course, whether the director made the right call or not, there is another question worth asking tonight. Why was he making that decision in the first place? Does the FBI director simply have too much power for a single unelected man? Joe DeGenova is a former U.S. attorney. He has watched this process from the beginning and he joins us now. Joe, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
So I don't think anybody wants to have concerns about an FBI director, but is there a basis for concerns about this one?
Yes, I got mildly nauseous today listening to his testimony one more time. James Comey is a danger to the country. He surrounds himself with his own cult of personality. He believes that he is the last righteous man left standing. When he held that news conference on July 5th and accused Hillary Clinton and then exonerated her, he violated every rule and regulation of the Department of Justice. He should have been fired that day. He never should have been permitted to stay after the inauguration. He should be fired now for the testimony that he's given over the last few months. That July 5th news conference was the original sin. From it, everything else followed. He says today, what would you have done on October the 28th? Mr. Director, I would have done nothing because I never would have held the July 5th news conference, which forced you to send 2 letters to Congress.
So you've worked in and around DOJ for a lot of your life. Explain to the rest of us what was wrong with that July 5th press conference.
He usurped the function of prosecutors. He's a cop. He's the FBI director. He's not a prosecutor. He may be a lawyer, but he's not a prosecutor anymore. His job is to investigate, Give the evidence to the Department of Justice and let them decide. He usurped the function of every prosecutor in the Justice Department. He should have been fired that day.
Why wasn't he?
Because Loretta Lynch was absolutely impotent as a result of having gone on that plane on the tarmac in Phoenix, Arizona. The entire Department of Justice was so frightened of Jim Comey because of the way they had politically mishandled the Hillary Clinton email server investigation that they were afraid to contradict him. That is what you call a disaster in a government of accountability. He stole the work of the Department of Justice in a single day, and they sat there and watched it. A pox on all of their houses.
Very quickly, can you discern a political agenda here?
Not from him. The only agenda James Comey has is James Comey. He is his own hagiographer. As I said, he believes he is the most righteous man in the world and that he can do anything he wants. That testimony today was an example of how bizarre his personality is.
It was certainly hard to understand from this perspective.
Indeed.
Joe DeGenova, thank you for that. We've got a Fox News alert for you. House Republicans have just scheduled a vote tomorrow on their proposed replacement plan for Obamacare. Party leaders say they now have enough votes to pass this proposal. They're calling it the American Health Care Act. Of course, they were confident a month ago, too, and that vote was canceled at the last minute to avoid defeat. This one could be different or not. We will keep you updated by the minute. A new study out of Norway says that migrants are failing to integrate into the culture or economy of Europe. We'll have Katie Hopkins on that, who's at a front row seat. Also, American media insists they are diverse and competent enough to properly cover the president and the rest of the news fairly, impartially. But if you think about it for even a few seconds, is that really true? Well, welcome back the editor of BuzzFeed, Ben Smith. Will next be asked to, I don't know, prohibit themselves from driving cars or voting or using public swimming pools or going outside except in the company of male relatives, all in solidarity with Islam because, you know, that would show the Islamophobes. Well, a new academic paper released earlier this spring has some discouraging news about Europe's experiment with mass immigration. The paper looks at 25 years of labor market data in Norway, and it finds that while they initially get jobs and assimilate into the nation's economy, immigrants from poor countries ultimately become less integrated over time. We've seen this in other countries as well. The longer migrants spend in Norway, the less likely they are to hold jobs and the more likely they are to be dependent upon government welfare. Katie Hopkins is a global columnist for DailyMail.com, and she joins us tonight. Katie, does this surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me at all. It's something we've seen here in Britain for a long time. I've always maintained multiculturalism doesn't work, that in fact what we end up with is a nation of ghettos. I think that's true here in the UK. And I think what we see is that migrants arrive, and typically because we now have so many economic migrants who haven't actually suffered war or endured real hardship, that they really want to create a country within a country. They don't see Islam as compatible with Western culture, Western values. So actually they would rather live alone, separate from our society. Certainly around 23% of British Muslims have said that they would prefer and look to live under Sharia law rather than any laws that we have here. So I certainly feel that when people talk about integration, for me, I always hear the word colonisation, because I think that's what's happening across Europe as we have opened our arms and our borders and told everyone to come and effectively take over.
So if you're going to do that, if you're going to bring people into your country in large numbers, don't you have some obligation to help them become part of your culture? Because countries in which nobody has anything in common fall apart. What are the European authorities doing to inculcate their values in these new arrivals?
Absolutely. You would think that, wouldn't you? You'd think we would kind of maybe have some lessons on British values, help individuals integrate by kind of showing them our ways and enabling them to join them. I see the complete opposite happening, actually. I see that we have to bow down to the cultures that come to join us. I believe we spend far too much time tiptoeing around the cultures of the people that choose to join us, far too little time standing up for the cultures that have chosen, they've chosen to join. I think we need to stand up for our culture and ask people to integrate into it, but I certainly don't see that happening. I think people, are punished for looking Islamophobic if they try and stand up for British values, and that's why things like having the flag, our national flag, having the English flag, the George Cross, that's seen now as kind of being almost verging on racist, potentially, certainly Islamophobic, because we're not then embracing these new cultures that come to join us.
So it's more offensive to the British ruling class and British authorities to be anti-Islam than it is to be anti-Britain.
Absolutely. I know the tick list of correct answers that the liberal fascists want me to answer. I know what they'll approve of. I know what they like, and that's endless gushing sympathy for migrants, economic migrants, for the Islamic faith. You saw with the Westminster terror attack here, the very first media that we had off of that was that we had to look out for our Muslim counterparts because they may be kind of under some kind of attacks following the terrorist attack on us. It's always that idea that we need to bow down to the culture that joins us, and we never seem to stand up for the culture they've chosen to join. And it's one of my big questions always is, if Islam is so fantastic, why do Muslims always seem to want to come to Christian countries? And it's a question that I never have got an answer to yet, Tucker.
It's a great question, and an awful lot's at stake, like 1,000 years of history. You take it seriously, and I appreciate that. Katie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, today's journalists are in a bigger bubble than they've ever been in before. That's not speculation. Research shows it. So how can they hope to write fairly about a country they don't live in and a presidency they unanimously, who are telling us on camera, I'm just here to report the facts. And then you read their Twitter feed, and they're like, basically, I hate Trump. And this is a fascist takeover of the country. I mean, they are out in the open liberal. And I would think,
you have a specific example?
Well, we've done like 15 shows on this. Well, no outlet better embodies how journalism has changed in the past 20 years than clickbait kingpin BuzzFeed.com, one of the most valuable news outlets in the world. Are they part of the new news bubble? Who better to ask than the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed, Ben Smith. He joins us tonight. Hey, Ben, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. Congrats on the show, the book, the memification.
I don't even know what that means, but I will accept your congratulations.
I don't know what the kingpin thing meant either. So
and I will respond with the obvious question, which is, hasn't Politico just proved what the rest of us knew was true for a long time, which is basically everybody who runs America's news organizations comes from the same world? According to Politico, 90% of all online news employees live in counties that voted for Hillary Clinton. You could have guessed that, but doesn't that lead to a certain kind of coverage, of course?
I mean, I think what he showed was the kind of tragedy that you've seen over the last 20 years of the collapse of these great news organizations all across the country.
Right.
Big regional papers, in Cleveland and Chicago. I mean, I think, I think our staff's more diverse than it's ever been. But we think about, regional diversity, too. I think that matters. We just hired a great political reporter in Cleveland, Henry Gomez, partly because I think it is important to kind of have people outside the Beltway, outside New York.
Right, but it's not just New York and Washington and L.A. It's specifically liberal counties. It's places that voted for Hillary Clinton, and that doesn't mean that all those employees voted for Hillary Clinton, but actually they did, because survey after survey has shown it's overwhelmingly a one-party state journalism.
I think that Politico piece said that something like 75% of the people they looked at were registered independents or weren't registered voters.
Right. But registration, not necessarily a marker for anything. I mean, another way to look at it would be the White House press corps has precisely, according to Politico as well, 0 registered Republicans in it. Now, maybe, there are some Republicans floating around there. Who knows? But it's still a much smaller number, I think it's safe to say, than the country at large. And so it doesn't actually represent the country it covers. Oh. And why is that not a problem?
I mean, I think, I think in a way the deeper problem, it pulls from people like us, educated people who live in cities who wanted to go into journalism as well. Like, there's a lot of different ways that it's a homogenous group. I think the best you can do is try to be fair in your coverage and look at the coverage, not look at the. I mean, but I think it was a great piece by Jack. Totally reasonable thing to observe.
No, but hold on. But you wouldn't say, and it's not exactly the same thing. But you wouldn't ever say something like that about racial or ethnic diversity. You wouldn't say, well, my newsroom is 100% middle-aged white men, but we're going to kind of do our best to understand perspectives different from ours. You'd say, no way, man. Get me HR on the line. We're going to diversify this newsroom. Why not do that with ideology?
Well, I'm not so regional in ideology, exactly the same thing. But I think conservatives make good. I've always looked for conservative political reporters. We stole our political editor from the Great Washington Free Beacon. I actually think ideological. I don't disagree with you on ideological diversity at all.
So there was this piece, I'm sure you saw this in Business Insider, which is pretty unbelievable, by one of your former employees who's gone on to become a kind of pro-Trump activist online. He didn't start that way. But he recounts what it was like to work at BuzzFeed. And I'm quoting him. He says, I was talking to my colleagues about the new Justin Bieber album. And I said, I love this album. I love Bieber. He's my spirit animal. And someone came up to me at BuzzFeed and said, hey, bro, you can't say spirit animal. That's culturally appropriating Native American culture. And it's not cool. And he said, I didn't really think this happened. But it does happen at BuzzFeed. That doesn't seem like a culture of free inquiry to me.
So he was an employee of our Los Angeles entertainment division.
Right.
You know, I did actually try to report out that anecdote because it sounds pretty preposterous. I don't think it happened. I was not there. More broadly, that story, it's a guy. His name's he goes under the name Baked Alaska. His name is Tim. I mean, I don't think he was not somebody who was, I think, persecuted for his conservative beliefs. This is somebody who I think obviously did not have a great experience at BuzzFeed. Left BuzzFeed, for a while hung out in the sort of pro-Trump movement, and then started tweeting about how Jews control the media and got tossed out of the pro-Trump movement. Okay. I don't really see a straight line between not having a great experience in our office and tweeting about the Jews.
He may be a wacko, but I'm still pretty sympathetic. I don't know anything about him beyond this, but this sounds right to me, having been around this a lot. He says, I got a lot of dirty looks, and people stopped inviting me to meetings when I said I was voting for Trump. It was like I was a heretic. Nobody wanted to talk to me. All their opinions about me changed. That sounds right to me. How many Trump voters do you think you have on staff at BuzzFeed, would you say?
I don't know. I do not ask people about their ideology.
Right.
But I obviously agree with you. I don't think there are a lot of journalists voting for Trump.
Right.
But again, you just told a story. I don't think that happened, that he was left out of meetings for his ideology. That certainly doesn't happen in our news operation.
So you don't think if someone came out in the middle of a BuzzFeed meeting and said, by the way, I'm an evangelical and I think abortion's murder, and I'm voting for Donald Trump, it was like, oh, yeah, that's cool. You know, just like another diverse member of our staff. You think they would say that?
Yeah, I think people are very respectful of the conservatives on our staff, and they wouldn't say they would have heated. I mean, we're journalists. We yell at each other all the time. We're not, but they're not shrinking violets.
No, of course. But I mean let's be totally
right?
real. If you said, I'm going this afternoon to get my concealed carry permit, and then on Saturday I'm going to go protest at Planned Parenthood because I think Jesus wants me to, you really think people wouldn't say, maybe out loud, certainly to themselves, this guy's a freak, and I don't want him here?
And then maybe the question is whether I'm going to be shunned for going on your show. I think I'll be all right.
Well, you're the editor, so there's nothing they can do.
Yeah, there's nothing they can do. It's true.
That's right. But behind your back, they're probably saying, why is he on with that dangerous authoritarian Tucker Carlson? Who knows? You see the point, though.
I'm not saying that. I guess I'm not arguing with you about the way people vote, the way they lean, but people just don't get into the business of reporting. I never did, because we are political activists. It's just not the first, second, or third things on our minds. My first gig was at a conservative newspaper in New York.
Right.
I also worked for a left-leaning New York newspaper, worked for Politico that has no particular ideology. But, I came into this because I wanted to report, to find stuff out, to tell stories. I think that's true of most reporters. And I think
believe that.
Political activists who in good faith accuse journalists of being activists are basically projecting. They say, I'm primarily motivated by politics, these journalists must also be. I just don't think that's not the newsroom conversation. I don't think any of these newsroomers, they're not most of them.
I think there's some exceptions, but I think you're generally right. The problem is the problem that pro-diversity activists always point to, and that's in unconscious bias, in taking your assumptions with you and not examining them, and that's why employers, and particularly you, spend so much time trying to, quote, diversify the way your newsroom looks. And I'm just saying, are you making the same effort to bring diversity of experience? And we both know you're not. And my question is why?
I mean, we think a lot about hiring people, both who are based outside the big cities and who come from a wide variety of backgrounds. So I don't know why you think that's not the case, because it certainly is. And I do think that matters.
Really?
I mean, I think one of the things that you really see where one of the places this comes through most clearly in media is TV coverage. The HBO shows that get all the coverage in the New York Times and in a lot of the media are not necessarily the shows that are widely viewed, which might be CSI. And I think that's a place where we in a kind of broad sense, think about trying to make sure we're writing about the show, the culture that real people are paying attention to. But for sure, I think like most journalists are college educated. I think most journalists had a certain set of experiences that leave them with huge blind spots.
Last question: have you ever heard anybody at BuzzFeed say, you know what, I just think abortion's murder and I don't think it should be legal? A lot of the country feels that way.
Do I have colleagues who oppose abortion rights? Absolutely.
Not abortion rights, abortion itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, good for you. Ben, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
The FBI director's testimony today mostly focused on Russia and his behavior during the election, but it was not the only topic. Director Comey also referenced the FBI's investigation of 2 physicians accused of illegally performing female genital mutilation on young girls in Detroit.
This past week, for the first time since Congress passed a statute making it a crime in the United States to engage in female genital mutilation, to mutilate little girls. It's been a felony in the United States since 1996. We made the first case last week against doctors in Michigan for doing this terrifying thing to young girls all across the country. With our partners in the Department of Homeland Security, we brought a case against 2 doctors for doing this to children.
Fwambai Amadou chose to undergo what she calls female circumcision as an adult. She's also an anthropologist, and in effect defends the practice of FGM, saying Western society is wrong to view it as inherently impressive. Dr. Amadou joins us tonight. Dr. Amadou, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So I'll concede this subject makes me so uncomfortable that I don't like to do segments on it.
Right.
But I also think it's really important because I think it's so horrifying that something like this is perpetrated on young girls as the father of young girls.
Right.
So you seem like a reasonable person and a well-educated person. It's amazing to me that anyone could defend this.
Okay.
On what grounds would you defend it?
So when you opened just now, you said that I defend FGM.
Yes.
And I don't defend FGM. I don't defend mutilation. I would never defend the mutilation of anyone. I don't identify with the term FGM, with the term mutilation.
Right.
I don't know anybody in my family who does or my community. And from over 25 years of research I've done on the field, I would say the great majority of women who are affected by what I call female circumcision practices do not see themselves as mutilated. So I think we need to start interrogating how we use that terminology.
Okay. I almost don't want to specify what it refers to because it's upsetting.
I think we should.
But it's the removal of a kind of key female sex organ in a lot of cases and this is being done to girls who obviously can't give consent.
Okay.
And it affects them for life. That would be my perspective.
Right. So, Tucker, this is why I think we do need to have a discussion on what it is. Because when we use the term female genital mutilation, automatically a certain image comes to mind, an image that's really been put out there for over 30, 40 years in the media, in the mainstream media, and obviously through activist efforts and women's groups. It's the idea of the most horrific type of procedure, which is type 3. WHO classifies this as type 3 infibulation that involves the suturing and sewing up of the labia majora. This is a very rare procedure that is confined basically to a specific part of sub-Saharan Africa, the Horn of Africa. It makes up less than 10% of the entire prevalence of the procedures in sub-Saharan Africa and across various parts of the world. We need to understand that over 90% of what we call female circumcision involves what WHO classifies as types 1.
Right.
And that's divided into types 1A and B, and types 2A and B as well. So, for instance, the Dawa Dibora case that has become quite talked about in recent weeks with the arrest of the doctor, the female doctor, Dr. Nargawala, I believe, in Michigan. Their community, their Shiite Muslim, quiet community here in the United States, their community performs first of all, they perform circumcision on boys. We'll get to that in a moment. And they perform type 1A circumcision, which is a nick of the prepuce, the foreskin of the clitoris.
Right. That is not actually what is illegal as far as I understand. What I understand is the removal of an entire portion of the female sex organ without the consent of the child. Now, you underwent this as an adult. There's a quantum difference between making a decision to do something like that and having that decision made for you that cannot be reversed as a child. That seems to me probably the worst thing you could do a child.
Okay, so back to the case of the Dawoodi Bora doctor who's now in prison waiting trial. She is accused, she's charged with FGM, mutilating two 7-year-old girls. She performed NICS type 1A to the clitoral.
Yeah, I don't know that.
But it's really important.
I don't know that that's
what's
true.
happened is it is true, and what's happened is that it's the activists that have actually made this, the term female genital mutilation they've conflated it with all these different practices.
Some of those activists are victims of the practice itself.
Well,
and we've interviewed them on this set, and they have said this has affected my life and my happiness and my ability to experience happiness in a profound way, and it's totally barbaric. And I guess I just don't buy the, hey, it's a different culture. Well, so is throwing widows on the pyre, and it's still wrong.
And I absolutely agree with you, Tucker, but there's one thing I want to correct. You said it removes a vital part of the female genital anatomy, all right? And is it okay if I actually say what that part is? Because there's a misconception about what actually, what these surgeries entail. There is no female circumcision procedure that removes the clitoris of a woman. It is absolutely impossible to remove a woman's clitoris without killing her. What is exposed is a tiny fraction of what is actually an extensive organ. That is
I'm going to stop you there, and just before we get too into it, let me just say, would you concede, because there are a lot of women who feel mutilated by this? This is not, this is being led by women.
Sure.
That maybe we should let adults make this decision and not impose it on 6-year-olds. Is that fair?
Well, here's what I think about it. There are a lot of men, who have experienced male circumcision, who say that this is mutilation. In fact, in the courtroom, when Dr. Nargawala appeared in court, there were protesters outside.
But
they weren't anti-FGM
But that's not
protesters.
an argument for female circumcision.
No, what I'm saying is, you're saying to me that there are opponents to female circumcision.
Look, as you know, there's a lot of research. I don't want to get into the circumcision debate on men, but there's research. Okay, well then there's research that shows there are profound medical advantages in that. There's no research that shows there's any medical advantage to female genital mutilation.
First of all, that research is contested. There's a lot of research out there that says, yes, there is harm, there is risk. Look, there are over 100 deaths,
that's a separate show.
Deaths each year from
that's
male
a separate show, and I'm open-minded. But what you're doing is not making.
You're saying we're abusing girls.
But that's like saying, we can't ban weed because beer is legal.
No, but listen, you are accepting that it is okay to perform a much more intensive or invasive procedure on boys.
I don't know that I'm accepting that. I'm just saying that this is bad to do to little girls.
It's pretty simple. I think if we accept it in American society that we do remove, or we do remove the foreskin on boys, we do practice genital cutting here in the U.S. on boys, then it should not be impossible to understand that there are cultures, there are societies that practice what certain people are now calling gender-inclusive
I just don't want it in my culture, in my society. I guess that's kind of what it comes down to.
So it's okay to cut boys in your
I'm not
society?
saying. Look, I'm just saying I don't want this because I think it's awful.
Well, we don't. In our culture, we don't discriminate. We have gender egalitarian surgeries. We do not discriminate. We don't discriminate.
We're out of time. I feel like we could finish the hour. I'd probably die of embarrassment by then. But thank you very much for coming on with that perspective. Well, a student group and imposing mandatory diversity training on all new students and transfers. Amari Reynolds co-chairs the Black Student Alliance and is one of the leaders in the takeover. She joins us now, I think, from within the administration building. Is that right, Amari? Is that where you are?
Yes, we are in the building now.
You're in the building now. Now, I have a list of your demands that you've written to the school. And one of them is changing the paint color on the outside of the Rosa Parks African-American themed house. Why is that so important to you?
Yeah, housing on this campus is important to Black students in general. Visibility at this campus, where we're less than 2%, is very important. So having that red, black, and green house in the middle of Stevenson College, which is a predominantly white-serving college, it's a matter of symbolism and visibility that Black students are on this campus. We do exist and we do pay to go here, just like our counterparts, and we do deserve to be seen here on this campus.
Okay. Do you want the school to change the interior decorating at all, or just the outdoor colors?
Just the interior decorating is already under has many of like different African American or Black Caribbean cultural paintings and diaspora paintings inside, but from the outside, no one knows what's inside the house. So it's very silencing to the Black students who do live there, and it's especially at Stevenson College.
Right. Okay, so you're doing a lot. I mean, that's not your only demand, but that's one of the key demands from this list that I have. And you're doing a lot to get this. Why not just, I don't know, paint it yourself? Just take a Saturday and just paint it the colors you want.
Because as vandalism and Black students are often arrested and often sometimes shot down by police, and we do not want to put ourselves at that type of risk.
Okay. So another one of your demands is for housing guarantees, and I'm quoting now, for all Black Caribbean-identified students. So housing just for African American or African students. That sounds a lot like the segregation that we read about, where schools 50 years ago had special dorms for African Americans. Why is it different?
I think it's very different. We're asking for a housing guarantee for Black students to live in the Rosa Parks African American themed house. We're not asking for only Black students. We're asking for Black students to have a guarantee to live in a house that the university advertises as a house that's meant for Black students. Currently, about 6 to 7 Black students live in the Rosa Parks African American themed house, and we're trying to ensure that Black students who do decide to come to UC Santa Cruz know that they have somewhere where they will be accepted, where they can live peacefully amongst whoever else chooses to live there with the shared common goal.
So would the guarantees also go to white students or Samoan students or Korean students, or would they be excluded from the guarantees?
Many students, we don't speak for the white students, the Samoan students, or the Korean students. If they want a guarantee to live in a certain house, they're more than welcome to fight for that, and we can support that in other ways. Right now, we speak for the African Black Caribbean students who are struggling on this campus and need housing, while there is a house that is supposed to be meant to protect them and live as a safe space that is currently only being occupied by 5 Black bodies.
How long are you going to stay inside the administration building? And has anyone tried to take you out, or are they just waiting for you to leave?
We're staying here until our demands are met. We have no intentions on leaving. We've gathered a lot of support through our Venmo, Black at Cruz, through social media. A lot of people have dropped off food and different resources and supplies for us. Our allies are here in support, and we're here to stay. Administration has reached out to us. We have a meeting with our chancellor tomorrow at 4 p.m. And we're staying here until our demands are met, and that's pretty much period. No options. It's not questionable.